Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Our first news item regards whooping cough. Scientists believe that whooping cough may be developing into what they consider a form of superbug. Whooping cough is vaccine preventable and has been since the mid-20th century. Unfortunately, for some people, it can be fatal, and the respiratory symptoms can be extreme. For this reason, it has long been used to avoid mass infections. Australian researchers believe that the bacterium behind it, known as Bordetella pertussis, is adapting to the current pressures of the world, making it a more effective agent. This is happening through systems that allow the pertussis bacterium to hide from the immune system. Hiding from it is the main way in which the bacterial population can expand. The same bacteria were found producing more nutrient-binding proteins. This allows it to feed better in more adverse environments. Together, this leads to more bacteria surviving longer and reproducing more often. The researchers do not believe there is any immediate risk, but they anticipate a need for modified, if not entirely new vaccines within 5 to 10 years. In other disease-related news, the mystery disease in China that we now know is a relative of SARS has been confirmed outside of China. A case was identified in Thailand, according to UN officials. The Thai doctors diagnosed the Chinese traveler with what they called mild pneumonia. Later, they confirmed it to be caused by the coronavirus, which has already infected many in China and led to at least one death. The Thai incident involved a 61-year-old Chinese woman who had traveled from the specific region of Wuhan, which is where this disease is said to have originated. Further to the Thai case, yet another incident has been identified in Japan. The Japanese patient was identified 2 days after the Thai patient. According to Japanese health ministry officials, the man that was diagnosed had also traveled to the Wuhan area of China. Neither Thailand nor Japan's health officials believe that there has been human-to-human transmission of this disease, and they doubt there will be going forwards. As a result, they claim the risk of an outbreak is minimal. In other news that's slightly more interesting and unusual, 23andMe has now moved from a large genetic testing company for ancestry to what could be described as a drug development cum pharmaceutical industry. They've now sold what they consider to be a pharmaceutical compound to a Spanish drug maker based on their massive banks of data, particularly their genetics data, which is important for identifying how and what you should use for certain conditions. Of the millions of people who have used 23andMe's services, about 80% have agreed to let their data be used in drug research. This has led to some contention without being arguments that if a blockbuster drug were discovered, 23andMe would be able to profit, but there's an argument made that the contract is deceptive and unfair. However, most people have signed it knowing this fact. The drug that they have just licensed is unlikely to fall in that category. It is a specific antibody meant to block a family of proteins involved in inflammation. This will help in lupus, Crohn's, and inflammatory bowel diseases. Not exactly the most profitable of industries. And so, the argument is made that overall, those who agree to surrender that data anonymously are only helping others in the long term and unlikely to be drastically increasing the profit margins of the company. The reality is this sort of business operates in a gray area. Strictly speaking, they're not providing anything medical, and so they're not regulated under health policies. But they're also not strictly a consumer service, such as going to a shop and buying products, and so the protections under that for their data are also not quite there. Instead, they are providing a niche service, and the general consensus has been at this stage that it's simply not possible to both compensate users of that service who pay for their results and agree to let them be used, and find a way to properly regulate this industry with the current framework. As a result, going forwards, it's likely to remain a status quo, with 23andMe continuing to outsource further development of anything they do find, as their services and company simply aren't able to move forward on these particular developments, and they will remain a data mining operation. In other groundbreaking and grey area news, scientists have created effectively functional minute organisms that are more like robots than they are living life forms. They are called xenobots. They are less than a millimeter in size and contain between 500 and 1000 cells. This is about the same size as a developing embryo. The configuration and contents of those cells allow them to perform many functions. This includes movement, self-organization, and movement of content from one part of a petri dish to another. Minute functions at this scale, but once you begin to consider how many of these small robotic-type organisms could be created and implemented, many opportunities are opened. Think of targeted drug delivery, bioremediation for areas contaminated by radiation, or even oil. That's not the most interesting thing about it. These were designed by an algorithm. The scientists are able to plug in a desired function, and an algorithm would create a series of designs that would match with that desired result. Much like a robot, these cells ran on a kind of battery. They had a series of lipids and proteins installed in them as part of the assembly process. This allowed them to operate for up to a week without additional nutrients. As something that tugs on our heartstrings, these Frankenstein's monsters of assembled cells are made from all kinds. Cardiac cells provide motion, skin cells hold everything else in position, and different cells perform specialized functions, but they are all from a frog. But there is no frog to be had. Without this, the question becomes, what are they capable of creating when they are no longer confined to the normal anatomical and physiological functions that can be found in this organism? Next is a little bit of light-hearted and entertaining news. In 1981, a giant gold bar was found in Mexico City. What we now know is that it was taken by Hernan Cortez and the conquistadors about 500 years ago and transported around. This was a period where Spain was expanding quickly. However, Cortez's expansion was initially illegal. He found his way to South America, where he gradually came to occupy a large part of it. This was more or less a large part of the Aztec Empire's fall from grace. One of the major events in this was known as the Sad Night, in which the Spanish forces retreated from the Aztec capital, but in the process of doing so, they took anything that they could get their hands on. This included the gold bar. The reason we know where it is that it came from owes to testing of its composition. It was matched to other similar pieces of the same period, which allowed researchers to match exactly where it came from, and, in conjunction with the known history, solves a 39-year-old mystery. In other light-hearted news, Canada sent out a false alarm to millions of its residents. A false alarm referring to a nuclear incident in the city of Pickering, near to Toronto. In what can only be assumed to be some effort at allaying fears of the public, the warning reads, "No abnormal release of radioactivity from the station, and emergency staff are responding to the situation." At 7:30 a.m., it's unlikely people would be paying that much attention to what was going on beyond the first line. It took at least an hour for new messages to come out telling people that this was not the case and that it had been an error. However, it does appear not all the people who received the first message received the second. An investigation is ensuing. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.